So how was any highlights for the weekend? What do you got a low light? All right, lay it on me.
They announced the European Super League soccer.
Okay.
And basically, like it's turning soccer and basically like the NFL. Like elite teams from across Europe want to play in just their own league basically, and it's like it basically gets rid of competition. You can't be relegated, and it just destroys the structure right now.
Okay. So it's the motive money. Okay. All right, there we go. Motive is money. So that's a low light for you. All right. Anyone have highlight or also a low light for the weekend? What do you got?
My cousin had her gender party on Saturday.
Then that's a highlight.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay. All right. And that went off good?
Yeah, it was fun. My cousin doesn't like popping balloons, and her friend made her pop like 30 balloons.
Oh, wow. Wow. There we go. All right. Sometimes, you see where those gender reveal parties go bad. All right. And then they end up on Snapchat or some social media out there. Yes. Yes. There we go. There we go. Highlight and a low light right there. All right. Any other highlights? My son came home for the weekend, and so we decided on Saturday night to go out for dinner. And I think my son, who's a junior in college, he probably would have enjoyed like going out to McDonald's or something like that. We went out to a little bit different kind of restaurant, but as we pull up to the restaurant, it's at the St. Paul Airport. It's Holman Table, but to get to the restaurant, we had to pass through the National Guard. And so what that just resonated with the Newcombs, as well as that it was part of Operation Safety Net. In Operation Safety Net, do we know the purpose, the meaning behind Operation Safety Net? What do you got?
I have a guess. It's pretty much to kind of weed out, figure out, stop anybody bad from coming. I guess, I don't know, just kind of be on the lookout for any suspicious activity.
Okay, but why would we even have Operation Safety Net?
Well, probably due to, well, if you're by the airport, it's the airport, and also just because the Mall of America is over by the airport and the protests going on right now.
Okay. You're right. The airports. We were in St. Paul, so that's a little tiny one compared to the Minneapolis, St. Paul, the international one. But still, Operation Safety Net is associated with the trial that's going on, and there's various phases to it. And so, what put Operation Safety Net in play was not only the trial, and that was really going to be put into play when the jury was going to go in the deliberation, which they will be, but because of Daunte Wright and the shooting of Daunte Wright had expedited Operation Safety Net. So around the Twin Cities, you will see a National Guard, and there are positives and negatives in seeing armed National Guard around the Twin Cities in selected spots. And so I guess, I just want to, for me, seeing that, I pulling up what I thought was going to be like, an easy night out, but just to see that it was a little, I would say, it was an adrenaline, as stopping the vehicle and just saying, hey, I'm just going to go up. We're just going up to the restaurant, and the National Guard's person's like, yeah, no problem. Just go right ahead and all that stuff. Which prompted, us to have a conversation, is that going to be kind of the response and the treatment for everyone? but you know, again, adrenaline and also just made us soberly aware of what's going on in the Twin Cities and nationally as well. Anyone else have like any thoughts when you see those National Guardsmen? I'm going to shut the door. What do you got?
My brother's a member of the National Guard, so
Okay.
they deployed him to the police department in Brooklyn Park,
Okay, so he's right there at the epicenter.
and then they all got. So
Okay.
it's like, and then I think I had gotten to talk to him a little bit, and it's a hard thing for him because he sees like the hurt that a lot of people are going through.
Yep.
The hurt that a lot of people have, but also it's his job to be there, and so he's struggling a lot, and I think it's kind of struggling a lot. People in the National Guard, like they see like people that are hurting, they might be hurting too, but it also is their job to be there.
Okay. All right. Anyone else? What do you got?
I feel like personally, I think that the National Guard, I get why they reacted so fast, and I truly understand that it is for safety.
Mhm.
But I'm kind of confused on how come they couldn't react that same way during January 6th, because at first when that situation first happened, I was like, give the National Guard time, they will react accordingly. And that, but as soon as this happened, they were out there first night, the night that Dante died.
Right.
So I just kind of I'm confused on priorities.
Yes. And so safe. I mean, I totally understand on that one. So I think with January 6th, still a lot is being learned about that. Conflicting reports on when the message went out for National Guard for more support. There was mixed feelings on whether or not it was necessary to do that. All right, doesn't make it any better. And so, I mean, they're still trying to sort that out, but clearly there was someone or someone's their reaction or maybe looking at did not perhaps perceive the issue to be as strong. In terms of, when you hear Governor Walz talk about how they reacted to Brooklyn Park versus, the other upright, when you look at the riots that occurred under George Floyd, I think Walz had said the lesson was learned that they need to send out right away. So Walz is looking at the year ago, what happened in Minneapolis and the surrounding areas, why they reacted the way they did. January 6th is still, that's going to take that one's going to be a little bit harder to sort out. What do you got, Smurf?
This is more of a thought.
Yep.
So there was like a police that got like a beat or something like that, like physically, someone was in here from, and I seen like 1 million cop cars, 1,002 cop cars when it came to the scene.
Yep.
Which I think this is just a thought, but I just think that's kind of, I don't know, reversed. I don't know if like the predator, it's kind of like reverse this one because you would think a murder would have a really good police, but it only a couple police cars.
So I think, oh, sorry. I don't want to cut you off.
Oh, no, I'm just saying, like, yeah, that's crazy.
So I think bringing is what happened at the Menards in Hutchinson, where a gentleman refused to wear his mask as he was checking out, and he had an altercation with the store clerk over the mask policy. they were not going to let him check out, and he got violent. And so authorities have been called. He fled the scene in what they described as a slow speed chase. I believe the gentleman is like 60 years old. And eventually, though, the police had stopped him, hemmed him in which he then assaulted an officer with a hammer. And the officer was injured. Some are looking at that in terms of would things be handled differently if the person was not white. So if it was a person of color, would the outcome have been the same where the guy was arrested, charged? Yeah, yes.
Also going back to the National Guard, when the George Floyd thing happened, they weren't really ready for the long riots coming. But the last year, they've also been like training for this, so this is why they're reacting right away.
So yeah, there was a lot of lessons learned from that. The initial rioting of National Guard was not there. They did not react. But I think some people also looking at the pulling out of police in certain areas when the rioting was initially happening, wondering why that was going on. There was some people are like, why didn't we have a plan in place here? You know, if anything we've learned from 9/11 is that we need to have multiple plans, multiple actions. And it wasn't like George Floyd was the first riot that Minneapolis or this nation has experienced. We have a history of riots as well. The nights that the riots were going on, I'm texting back and forth with my mentor, and we're talking about how is this compared to the race riots that had happened in 1992 and in the 1960s. Of course, I can't really speak too much of the riots of the 1960s. I was in diapers. I was a toddler. He's more of a young, he's a teenager, young adult while that's going on. So, but no, we have learned a lot in the year on how to, at least locally, how we want to respond. This is unfortunate, that we're once again, in the spotlight. All right. Anyone else have any thoughts? I mean, this is going to be a big week. This is a big week for us in Minnesota here, and with the trial, they got their final statements today, and then the deliberation is going to be occurring. All right. What do you got? Do you need to have a college? You need to have training, yes. And many of them do have certifications to be a police officer. And you'll find that some have multiple paths to becoming police officers. I can't speak to all those different paths. I mean, I have family members who have been in law enforcement. So I've had family members on both sides. I'll be honest. I've had family members on both sides of the law. All right. But when it comes to law enforcement, there are some that have college degrees, four-year college degrees. Some have community college degrees. There are multiple paths to becoming officers. And I think that is under the spotlight is how we are training and how officers are being selected. Everything's on the table. Anyone else? Good moment. Heavy duty stuff here on Monday, but we deal with hard stuff. Try to. Go ahead.
So clearly, like when the first riots happened, we weren't in school, but we were affected even out here.
When what first happened?
The first George Floyd.
Okay, gotcha. Yep.
Protest happened, and we were even affected out here. Police were
Yep.
accordingly. And do you think that over this next week, you think our school is going to be affected based off what happens?
I think all communities around this area, the metropolitan area, is going to be impacted some way. Whether or not, a lot of it's going to be hinged on the verdict. All right. And so myself, I'm anxious to see what that verdict is. We know in Minnesota, if we look at history, we do not have a history of convicting police officers. It's very rare. So it'd be very interesting to see what happens. Not to say that it's not going to happen this time, but if we look for past precedent, we don't have a history. What do you got? Smurf, were you going to say something? Okay. All right. Anyone else? Big stuff here. Didn't think about that. I'm going to come walking in on a Monday. But if we don't have any more thoughts, but if they do pop up, feel free that any day we can share some thoughts about that. So we are at the end of this trimester this week. And so we want to make sure that we're finishing strong here. And so like I've said, deadline for missing work is this Thursday. In my mailbox today, I've got a list here for senior holds. So if we are academically struggling here, might be put on this senior hold. And all teachers have that, and we have to submit that by May 3rd for 3.1, and 3.2 we'll have something similar to that as well. So if for some reason that you can't make this Thursday deadline, please let me know. I will work through just about anything. So, all right. So we got that. All right. Big stuff. So this week, I want to put some closure with the Cold War. And in many ways, this Cold War was an ideological war between the United States and the Soviet Union. And we have been working towards containing the spread of communism, and they have been working on to export their brand around the world. And they were having some successes in the 50s and the 60s. Then the 1970s happened. And, it's not because of disco and all that stuff, but because of, it seemed like the price tag, the political cost, the social cost all seemed to be coming together in the 1970s for both countries. And so when we look at the Cold War coming to a conclusion, we in the United States like to say we played a huge role in causing the Cold War to come to end, that the Soviet Union, which was dubbed by Ronald Reagan the evil empire, came crashing down in the 80s and the 90s. We like to say that we were a main player in that. We were a player, but how big of a player in the end was it? Was it more? Were there some other factors? And that's what we're going to look at this week, is maybe some of those other factors. What's happening inside the Iron Curtain? What's happening inside the Soviet Union that could possibly explain why it collapses, and that maybe we were just more on the sideline watching it happen so fast and furious. All right. So I have a little video clip here that I want to kind of highlight people's power. All right. Power of the people, something that we learned about the 1960s in creating change. Power of the people coming out in the 70s and the 80s in Eastern Europe and inside the Soviet Union here. So here we go. I got a little video clip here. So let's see what kind of thoughts or reactions that we might have with that. Okay, so let me mute.
World, after years of resigned acceptance, millions of people have finally stood up. Back in the 1970s, the Soviet system was at the height of its power. Each year on the anniversary of the October Revolution, they celebrated an idea still expected to transform the world. Soviet television interviewed Nina Motova as a hero of socialist labor.
Пленум ЦК КПСС и сессия Верховного Совета СССР наделила четкой программой работу. Ведь партия осуществляет руководящую роль. Мы ходили первой колонной от Мавзолея.
We marched closest to the mausoleum, so proud because our region and our factory were always considered the best. We paraded our ball bearings. The watch factory showed their new watches. Each factory displayed their achievements. We were so proud our country was so powerful. We felt like one beating heart.
The communist world stretched from the Pacific in the east to the heart of Europe. Poles, Czechs, Romanians and East Germans were all seen as part of the same great family. In Berlin, Mike Fernell carried the banner for the district of Lichtenberg.
Everybody was marching in the same direction, towards the sun. If I was tired or depressed, those songs gave me a lift.
Für mich waren das diese Lieder. Ja, wie zum Beispiel Völker hört die Signale.
They gave me a real push.
Schub nach vorne.
The future lay onwards and upwards, powered by the Brotherhood of Socialism. A socialist Superman was creating a better world, all in the name of Lenin. The fabulous vision inspired new generations of schoolchildren.
We were everything. We had the best tractors, the best schools. Everything was the best here. We never had any doubts.
Мы пионеры, юные ленинцы. По-ленински жить и трудиться – наша большая мечта. Ребята, гордимся нашим солнечным краем. Городами, полями разлиты, и пресновья чист.
For Dasha Khubova, the Russian fairy tale about an all-knowing king who could see into every home was very real.
I believe Brezhnev also sent his head around the city. I could see his head there instead of the king's. Of course I loved him. I couldn't help loving him. He was our king. Every night I sat up in my bed half asleep with my curtains open and I saluted Brezhnev. I imagined his head was somewhere near looking at me. And I saluted so he'd know good people lived here.
The state planned for everything. People's lives were mapped out for them in a system that claimed to provide the care and stability that capitalism never could.
Our state was an example for the whole world. No unemployment, free healthcare and free schooling. Everything was organized, for everyone down to the youngest child. It was all planned in advance, even how many bearings would be sent to which factory.
And by the 1970s, the central planners were attempting to produce everything a modern consumer might demand.
Jako Alenka v říši divů se budete cítit v obchodních domech Prior. Z nepřeberné nabídky zboží našeho trhu se vám zatočí hlava.
Wendig! Schnell! Ausdauernd und robust. Ihr zuverlässiger Begleiter, der neue Trabant 601.
As a skilled worker in one of Czechoslovakia's biggest factories, Petr Miller's standard of living was rising.
I had a car, I owned a cottage. I knew that they had Mercedes in the West. Yes, it's a great car, but they're both cars, and they both get you from A to B.
Party control of all newspapers and television meant people heard only the good news, the propaganda of success.
Za 25 let socialistického zemědělství se zvýšila výroba obilí o 70%.
Decisions were made for you somewhere else. The party newspaper told you what to think. All we could do was chat over a beer, and we were far more interested in sport.
It was a world of mass illusion, in which the individual was part of the whole, and the whole part of the individual.
There I am, below the letter E. I remember how terrified we were to get it right, not to put up the wrong card, because Ceausescu was there in front of us. And for him, everything had to be perfect.
When Romania's President Ceausescu was shown visiting markets, Mihai Radu knew the displays of food had little to do with real life.
The truth is that the shops didn't even have 1/100th of what we used to see on TV. There was little food. No meat, butter, milk, no cheese.
Across the Soviet bloc, communist economic planning wasn't delivering. Queuing became a way of life.
Nie narzekam, teraz nie narzekam, nie gumburonie, nie narzekam. Ale powinno być trochę lepiej. Bo wie pan, żona idzie w kolejkę, stoi, cholera nie ma, ty kupisz te parę deko wędliny, nie ma. Tyle u nas w Polsce świnie hodują, u nas nie można kupić.
My good fortune was that my grandparents were still alive. I remember my grandfather would take a little stool down to the shop, where he would sit all night until the shop opened the next morning. That was when the Romanian proverb was coined. If you don't have a granny, you better buy one.
People spent up to 5 hours a day in line. The wait for a flat was 15 years. But the party still tried to persuade them that
Any reactions or any thoughts? Standing in line brought back memories of last year around this time. You know, it's like, oh, before I go to work, you know, I might want to park out before Target, you know, and and see if I can get in line there to get some paper product or whatever it is. For some reason, you know, we had the rush, right? But that was amazing. What I remember coming back from spring break and just realizing, you know, I got to go to the grocery store and get some things. And I'm texting my wife and I'm like, I don't understand why people are getting frantically for all these certain products. And then I was slow to react, obviously, to people who were getting worried that this stuff is not going to be there because we're going to be, you know, we're in the early phases of a pandemic. And then people did get crazy for doing stuff like that, you know, multiple people going to different places and stocking up or hoarding, whatever word you want to use to go with it. And so that moment did remind me of, when I think of this, what it was like on a daily basis for people in the communist bloc countries, where the state was to provide for everything, but in reality, they weren't able to come through for it, especially in the 70s and the 80s. The norm was shortages and rationing. So that was a clear reminder that something was going on with the communist world, in that it wasn't a worker's paradise. And there could be a number of reasons why. Productivity seemed to go down because, you know what? Everyone is guaranteed a what? A job. Everyone is guaranteed a job. And there was no differentiation between pay and it's not like you were going to be fired. And so productivity wasn't there at the level that it needed to be. Absentee rateism on the workplace was high in many countries. All right. But no reactions, no thoughts. Another thought came to mind when they were running across the field. Hope they don't run into each other. So that would be an epic wipeout. And then, boy, Ceausescu would be mad with that. But when we look at the Soviet control, the Soviet state, and their satellite nations, what went into that control? All right, so just want to highlight this before we look at the collapse of communism. And when we look at the satellite states in Eastern Europe, right? And so we're talking about like Poland, Hungary, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, Albania. They all fit into this category as satellite states. And Joseph Stalin, that was his goal, was to establish, and I have a copy of these online you can follow. That was his goal. So from 1945, 1948, through our Cold War steps, he establishes these Soviet states. And then they put in place one-party rule, Moscow trained leaders, that's that baggage train, nationalization of private enterprise, so taking over of the private industries here, Soviet-style 5-year plan, so very centrally controlled in that regard. Agriculture is collectivized, and the integration of the economy of Eastern Europe with the Soviet Union. Molotov Plan and Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, or COMCON, as it's sometimes referred to. That's how they did it. And to maintain that meant that the economic and the political system was backed up by the authoritarian control. Things that we know: the secret police, the censorship, the suppression of religious freedom, the Soviet presence, so the Red Army, political purges of anyone who is not Moscow trained. And we'll see that happen with these showcase trials, and of course, political coordination from Moscow. All that goes into it. And one would say, you know, again, Up to 1948, the containment is there, but in the 1950s, you are going to see some cracks. All right, and the Cold War crisis that you looked at showcased some of those cracks, whether it was in like places like Berlin, and in the 1960s, you know, with Czechoslovakia, Hungary. In the 1950s, you have some of these cracks that would happen here, but they were contained, is the key. They were contained, and they were contained by direct Soviet control or indirect, maybe through, again, the local communist authorities and their regimes. We can also say the cracks began when Stalin is no longer the leader, because Khrushchev is it. And so many of these challenges happen when Khrushchev opens up restrictions, all right? And so the containment cracks are happening in places throughout the Eastern Bloc. You know, with Yugoslavia, they were marching to their own beat no matter what. Marshal Tito, in some ways, gave the historical communist middle finger to Stalin and survived. All right, and is able to do that because he's a nationalist first, communist second. In Czechoslovakia, you know, you have, as well as in Hungary, you've got some progressive reformist communists. And even though they might have been suppressed in the 50s and the 60s, they're still there. In East Germany, this desire to be reunified, right? And the problems with the West is big. And in Poland, a trade union is going to spark a change, solidarity, big stuff. So again, why, you know, the de-Stalinization under Khrushchev, opening up, wanting a better standard of living, clearly is that. There's a very vibrant black market, you know. Ultimately, some people in Eastern Europe, they want to wear Levi jeans because that's part of the better standard of living, maybe. They might want to have a Mercedes than a Trabant. Or instead of a Yugo, because if you drive a Yugo, it might fall apart. Literally, it did. In the 1980s, there were some people buying Yugos in the United States, and literally bumpers would fall off. It's kind of humorous. So if you saw a bumper with duct tape, it's like, oh, there goes Yugo. But you can't go fast. Can't go for them. Political choices. They want more than just one party. However, us in the United States, we're kind of addicted to two parties. We struggle to have multi-parties, but still, they want choice and social freedoms, of course. Being able to move around, be able to go. Really going to help create some changes here is leadership changes. In the 1980s, we are going to see some leadership changes. In the Soviet Union, they will go through 3 leaders before they get to Mikhail Gorbachev in 1985. So from 1980 to 1985, they go through Brezhnev, Andropov, Chernenko, and then 1985, they finally get to Mikhail Gorbachev, and he'll be the last. And he'll be there till 91. And then for us in the United States, it's Ronald Reagan. That happens. He gets elected in 1980. He takes over in 81. And then I could also throw Bush in there near the end of the 1980s. But so much is in the Soviet Union. Mikhail Gorbachev. The Soviet Union, in many ways, it's like an old ship that seems to be stuck on the bottom and needed to try to find a way to move forward here. And so it is with the Soviet Union and Mikhail Gorbachev that he brings in some new changes, all right? Changes like Glasnost and Perestroika. Glasnost opening up, Perestroika meaning changes to the economic structure. So socialism is going to change here. But he's not interested in getting rid of it. However, it's going to be at a faster pace, Uskrina, which means acceleration. And the system may not be ready for that kind of shock. Because once they opened it up, it's going to be hard to slow it down. But because of Mikhail Gorbachev is restructuring what's happening at home, He's loosening up controls in Eastern Europe and around the world, one would say. And that, again, is with Glasnost. The economic and the political stagnation in Eastern Europe is also forcing the cracks to open up. People are tired of the same old, same old. You know, they're tired of Erich Honecker of East Germany, who's been there, it seemed like, since the 1970s, forever. They want some change. And they're hearing about what's happening in the West. It's not like they're completely isolated. They can get information, and they understand fully what's going on. And then there's a rise of nationalism, as we saw, you know, nationalism take place in like Serbia and Kosovo. All right, so this is happening around this time period as well. Nationalism is going to become very powerful, especially inside the Soviet Union as well. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, they all want their own independence. They are flexing nationalism. All that is playing a part here in the challenges. And so the collapse of communism is going to go fast and furious. I remember as a college student watching it take place, and how every day in the multiple newspapers that I would read, I would see images of communism coming under attack here. Whether it's in Poland with Solidarity, whether it's in Czechoslovakia with Civic Forum, or whether it's within the Soviet Union. And then, of course, in China with Tiananmen Square. That is going to be different. But when we look at the collapse, some countries, it was peaceful. Yes?
Why did the Soviet Union relinquish control over a huge amount of its own even ethnically Russian territory? Had the military might simply force them to commit segregation?
So when we look at Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, they saw what the Soviets had done in Eastern Europe and not stopping. And Mikhail Gorbachev tried to stop Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, but will fail. The local communists disregard it. And they went ahead and declared their independence. And the international community was very quick. Mikhail Gorbachev, when that was going on, so we're looking at 1990s, 1991, when that's going on, he is also fighting for political survival at home. There will be a coup against Mikhail Gorbachev. So this would be part of, in many cases, his glasnost approach as well. He was hoping that by opening up and allowing them to have more voice and more say, still at the end of the day, they're going to pick communism. But in reality, they didn't. So when you look at Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, they were going to leave whether or not he was going to. Did he send in the tanks? Yeah, he sent in the tanks briefly. But then he recalled the tanks. Mikhail Gorbachev understood what one could say what was happening. Okay, and we're going to take a little bit at that. Violent as well. Some of these countries are going to violently have internal problems, like Romania. Implosion, like the Soviet Union implodes. Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania starts the thing in motion, and then other communist or party officials, local party officials, like Boris Yeltsin of Russia, is going to convince others, you know, let's just rethink and change the entire Soviet Union. And at that point, Mikhail Gorbachev is more on the sideline. He's pushed to the sideline. And external pressures, of course, you know, the United States, we don't really have to do much except support, come out with words of support for what is happening. Behind the scenes, though, we're kind of worried, like, what the heck is going on here? We have to change our policies and stuff like that. All right. So by 1992 or by 1990, it only seems like Fidel Castro is the only one left when all said and done at the communist reunion. So I think that's maybe just a little bit early. What I think is kind of interesting is, no, that's only one watch. Sometimes he wears two watches. So we need to take a look at this collapse, and that's what we're going to do today. So let's pop into Schoology here. We're going to open this up, and we're going to work on this for the next several days here. It says solo, but no, you can work with a historical buddy on this. All right, so those at home, you can work with buddies on this. So collapse of communism. You know me, I love my attachments, and the first one is this, the collapse of communism. And so it looks something like this. All right. And so here we are looking at how it takes place in Poland, East Germany, and Czechoslovakia. Those are the big ones. The other ones are also very important, but want to focus on these. There's also a plethora of information. What we want to see is in these countries of Poland, East Germany, and Czechoslovakia, what is specifically the cause of the tension? Policies, treatment, actions. Are there groups? Are there groups? And there are well-organized groups in these countries. I mentioned, like in Poland, you got Solidarity. That was a trade union. I remember going to the state fair in the 1980s, and Solidarity, you actually have a booth at the Minnesota State Fair, because there's also a large Polish community in Minnesota as well. In East Germany, you have very progressive communists, but also religious groups are going to play a part here. And in Czechoslovakia, you have a group known as Civic Forum or Charter 77. It's going to be big. We want to see how are the Soviets going to respond to them, whether it's the Soviets or the local communists as well. Poland's not going to be easy here. Martial law is going to be being thrown around there as well. So much what happens in East Germany is because of what happens in other countries, but then also maybe clerical errors as well, and then outcomes. And then ultimately here, our HQ is exploring the role of nationalism and people power in ending communism in Eastern Europe. Did it really have a role? Now, to help you with that, of course, I had some attachments there. And chapter 15 is a good nugget of information, but also Eastern Europe, Communism and Crisis is a good one. So those two sources should be really all you need. You shouldn't have to GTS it. All right. I also have a few others there as well. Okay. So we're going to start this today. We'll work on this tomorrow, do Wednesday. All right. I did send out a kind of a preview of the week, so we get a sense here of what's happening here. This is our primary focus. We want to see how Cold War comes to an end here, and then Thursday, wrap it up with an assessment that is there already in Schoology. All right, so and Thursday be more of when you come to class, we're just going to wrap things up. I'm going to give you time to wrap up loose ends, and if you want, you can take the short answer assessment in class on that day, knowing though that there's a time limit though. All right, a lot going on. Questions, comments, concerns, anything that needs to get clarified? Those at home, if you got any questions, please let me know. Anyone here? Any questions? All right, we had some heavy duty stuff here. Those at home, you can either stay on, ask me questions, or exit and have a great day. Those here, let's get a good start.